But it was a shame that he had to do that to protect, he was growing apples. I mean, he didn't have a pig farm. But so this whole issue of urban encroachment, it's something we saved the ALR, we got the land, but people were building right up close to it. And of course, it ends up, they do not understand agriculture, so we start complaining. Planning was disaster. Look at these road endings here. This is the ALR. Now, what those road endings are basically saying, well, you can farm it until we extend the road. So they had no respect that this land was forever into food production. And so we had an issue there. So this is when, we call it FPPA, but it's the Farm Practices Protection Right to Farm Act, and it came in '96. And I'm going to go through the 3 sections on it. But first of all, it established right to farm legislation for farmers, protect farmers. There's sections in the Local Government Act now that stop local government from just overriding any farm. It basically would have to work with certain standards that are there. And the Land Titles Act, and I'll just go through these. This is the Provincial Act. So that's when the Strengthening Farming Program started, because we put in this legislation. We had to switch our efforts in the Ministry of Agriculture throughout the offices in the province so that we could handle this. So the Right to Farm section, it protects farmers from nuisance suits and court injunctions. The farmer has to operate under normal farm practice. But basically it says to the farmer, if you're doing it right, then the province will step in and stop anybody taking you to court. Very strong legislation it was. Farmers must meet the Health Act, Waste Management Act, Pesticide Control Act, and they also must meet any government bylaws. Now the government bylaws, I'll tell you, we I hate the word control, but we really got in control of what they could do. So if there was a law in there and the zoning bylaw or the bylaws itself, then they would have to obey that. We set up a review board, and that board, any of the public could go to that board and say, I think that farmer is not operating under normal farm practice. That review board would look at that, and then if they weren't, they would go to the farmer, either cease the farmer or basically leave the farmer open to be sued, because they're not operating under normal farm practice. We've got lots of documents on this. If anybody's further interested in that, we have farm practices and books like this. All this is online. On the environmental side, we had to work with the Ministry of Environment. I have a Waste Management Act, and that controls all waste from any industry in the province. If you want to dispose of a waste, you get a permit. We said agriculture is different if they're fertilizing, and they agreed, so we set up these standards, these 2 regulations, and then we set up this Code of Agricultural Practice and then guidelines. And the farmers now had standards that they had to work to. They would be protected under the right to farm, providing they were meeting what we set up. And it cleaned up a lot. So those farmers that were abusing the system can't get away with that anymore. So we had a lot of guidelines, and the farmers themselves started getting involved in doing peer inspection. So this is not accepted now. Years ago, they used to not have a big enough manure pit, go out on the snow, the land was frozen, and spread manure. That's disposing of a waste, you need a permit. So this is all stopped now. So this person can't do that. And we weren't too strict with the rules. We said, look, if you have dry manure, poultry manure for the raspberry fields, you cover it with a tarp, make sure there's no leachate. So you didn't have to build a big fancy box, a big storage unit. So we gave them lots of flexibility, and they went along with it. Even our cattle got on side, all started backing up to one pile. Smart cattle over there. We had made lots of books that we made. This one was, we were looking at it the other day, Sonia and I were looking at it, and it looks like a 50s book, I know. We had to do it fast. But the book is amazing how many people complain about agriculture. We give them the book, they went away, never heard from them. And all it was saying was like pests or pesticides or necessary smells. It was explaining what farming was about. Once they read it, that was it. It's amazing how awareness can, and that's why I said in the beginning, it's not the public's fault that they're not aware, that we have to teach them that, and that's what we learn. The Local Government Act itself, so now it stopped them from making bylaws that were banning or prohibiting different farm units. They had to work on a set of regulations, and I've got an example here, and you can get them online. They had to get approval. If they wanted to go away from these standards, move away, they had to get approval from the Minister of Agriculture. And there was a farm bylaw that could only be implemented with the Minister's approval. So the attempt was to try to solve every problem. If you had a really bad farm, there was runoff or something that was been there for years, then we could come up with a separate bylaw just for that farm. But the Minister of Agriculture always had to approve it. So you had a safety check that you didn't have a runaway government in the sense that just didn't like farming. This is the guide for bylaw development. And the last part of this strengthening farming section was the Land Titles Act. This was very important part. What it is in our system there, we have approving officers that a new subdivision going in, the province will come in to make sure it's being done properly, you know, whether it's the right sewage, everything, the road systems. What we gave them the power to do, they didn't have it before, was that if a new subdivision is going next to farming, the approving officer can say, you know, you're going to cause a problem here, you better put a buffer in. They had no power before. So the developer could say, I'm sorry, we're going to put the houses and condos right up to the edge and good luck. But now we stopped it. So they could say, no, you do a design. It would be simple sometimes. Instead of having the park on one side, you put the park alongside the farming. It was very simple that they just weren't thinking about it. So it didn't take a lot. They actually got really involved to make sure the community plans were approved by the Land Commission. So we started getting everybody involved in protection farmland. These are some examples of the booklets. Again, you can get them online, and I've got some here. Great document, Planning for Agriculture. If you really want to see how to do the whole job, Barry Smith, a colleague, had done this, and it's an excellent document. So we didn't just walk away. We set up agri-teams. So we had somebody from the Ministry of Agriculture, somebody from that local government doing the planning, and somebody from the commission. We sat together and we started implementing these standards. So we were always there to bring it in. And now it's pretty independent, but we've still always got a team going into it. We got them developing agriculture area plans. And most of the time, every plan is to do with urban development. Like, how far can we go? Can we get the sewer out there? This is an agricultural plan for that community that now fits into the system, that you give the needs of agriculture. And it fits into the official community plan. This was a big step because they started learning about agriculture. And the farming community, we got them on side. They now form agriculture advisory committees directly answerable to the council. There's a member from council sitting on there, the local government, and that way you can get onto all the problems and issues, whether it's a day-to-day or long-term. So it's an excellent way of communication there. So this last quick part is to do with edge planning, and this is on the edge, and how do we try to make this work? And that's the goal of the next section, I guess, that we're working on. What we had done is we developed, I said about those approving officers, we developed a 600-meter buffer. And if you look at the green line there, that is the agricultural land reserve. So 300 meters inside and 300 meters out. And in there was different types of planning going on. And we have a document here. And Karen Thomas, who unfortunately couldn't make it, she was one of the major players in developing this. So we have a guide for edge planning. Again, it's all online that you can get access to. And it was quite simple, really, because like if you look, what they were doing, here we had those road endings again. And we're just saying, don't do it like that. Just do it like this and put a buffer on the edge. It's really simple planning. It's not rocket science at all, but it was just that, you know, you've always done it that way, so you carry on doing it. There's tables in there talking about certain setbacks for certain ways you can handle it, and it talks about buffers. So when we look at that urban edge, first of all, you look at the road ending there. So you have to close that off, we said, and we've given all the tools to be able to do that now. So now they can develop it. One side, you can actually put a covenant on the new buildings going in, and we've had that where they explain about agriculture and you cannot complain about normal farm practice. And then all this is done through what we call a development permit area on the urban side. So that approving officer's got 300 meters to say, we want you to plan differently so that you can actually save our farmland and not cause a major conflict to start with. On the farm side, just as important, we couldn't have a person coming in with the pig farm and going 10 meters off the property line and blowing the fans into the existing residential area. So some of them try. They got to learn something, you know, but basically that's ridiculous, right? You're not going to solve any problem. So this on the farm side, where there's farm bylaw, so you had setback distances. So if you had a major manure pit, if you had a big dairy and the number of cattle, the farther you go back. The thing you have to watch is you don't go to extreme, because you start eliminating the ALR for that use, and then the owner's at the door saying, you've taken away my right to farm, I want it out of the land reserve. So you have to set it up so that you can still farm it. Farm management, and I said you can talk about manure handling and density. And again, it has the tables in there that tells you how to set up your farm next to an existing, or even if it's a non-buffer area. Simple planning like fans. Here's a diagram. Instead of having the fans all blowing into the urban area, you can just put them in a different place when you build your barns. And sometimes it's really that simple, just to change it. So edge planning does work. It's great if you've got topography to help. This is a wooded area. This works very well, and of course the Commission are very happy with it because it starts to solidify that boundary of the ALR. Here's another one up in that area I talked about, the Okanagan. A great buffer, works very well. Educating the public, we put up signs, tell them and they're very happy. Sometimes they go by and learn about agriculture, walk through the buffer area. You could have a little walk trail and explain agriculture and why we've got it. The thing we're working on right now, it's a new one. It's gone in front of the minister, but the idea is that we want to stop. We call them monster homes. We don't have monsters over there, but they call these massive homes that go into the ALR. So sometimes they'll buy 10 acres, 20 acres, put a massive house in the middle, put a road into it, and destroy the farmland. Now they're setting up that you can only build your house. You have a 60 meters square, depending on the size of the property, but you could have a 60 meter square footprint for your residential use. So if you want a big house, you may not have a tennis court. So if you want a smaller house, you can have a swimming pool too. So that's up to you. But the idea is you do not destroy the farmland in the process. So we're trying to stop massive estates. So these last few slides is support material is very important. So we got into a big GIS program. And you know, when you have all these different layers, the more layers you have, the more information you can give local governments. It's worked very well. It enhances the knowledge of agriculture, of course. It tells them what it's good for, what's happening in their area. If they want to make some changes, it shows you what farms you affect. And it promotes farming development. This is an example. So you see it says 440 hectares of blueberries. In Pitt Meadows, it goes up to 830. It's a great tool because you can actually show them what farming is doing for the economy, and you can put a number on it. Last part here is urban side. We got to the other side, and we basically said, look, you can't just keep building and wasting your land on the urban side. This is Abbotsford. We figured out there's 7 temporary parking spots per vehicle. I mean, if you build a mall like this, I mean, look at what's a waste of land. There's a group called Smart Growth, BC. They were working on the inside, trying to get them to change the urban development so that they could stop going into farmland. And they did some great jobs. This is one example. So they take it and they go and make presentations to council and say you can change it to Fitzroy, you know. And it's really good because they actually start to understand it. And the public like this, you know, they don't mind this. They say, oh, if we could build a place like that, I'd live there. So it's again education. That's the early business failures, a porcupine on a stick. One thing that we learned was that you've got to try anything. You've got to try something and go for it, even if it wasn't done before. Try it because it might work, and just because we haven't done it before. One of the big things we got into was going to the annual meeting of all local governments called the UBCM, Union of BC Municipalities, and doing farm tours. Very successful. Took them in, we put a booth in there, we gave away apples. They got to know about agriculture. They got to know the good farmers. Only take them to the good farmers. You don't want somebody tearing them out for a day's visit. But we had lunch on the farm. It's now the most successful tour actually in the UBCM. And again, that follows off. You can do it with local governments. You can do it with we have cycle tours and stuff where the farmers have places you stop at and learn about the farm. You can try anything. There is a limit, of course. This is a farmer's calendar, nude farmer's calendar, and I'm not sure whether a little pot-belly man in Wellington boots and manure is going to turn me on to eat the food, but anyway, I think they just wanted something to, people were interested in it, so they didn't sell very many, I don't think. The last one is that we realized we had to get involved with kids, and so we have a great Agriculture in the Classroom Foundation to start teaching, starting off from the beginning here, to teaching them about agriculture. We give fruit and vegetables away in the schools, and so it's a great program. It starts getting kids to understand it. And this last saying, everybody understands this one, but it says, we did not inherit the earth from our parents, we are borrowing it from our children. And I think planning doesn't make sense if you're not planning for the future. And that's, I guess, what we're trying to do with some of the stuff we've done here. Anyway, thank you very much. So.